To pitch or not to pitch? That is the question. And I could say, fuck that, I never pitch, but that wouldn't be wholly true. Because I've never won a job from a pitch, well, that would be largely, but not wholly true as well. Truth of the matter is, not all jobs and not all pitches are created equal. And when are we not kind of pitching, even if we're on a film, whether that be mood boards, theme suites, version 98 of 7M98. And what is on, anyway, or being commissioned, it really is just a word. We're not really on a film until our score is burnt into the side of the negative. Showing your age there, Henson. After all, our American cousins got a very different version of the score for Witchfinder General, arguably one of the greatest pieces of horror score in the British canon. So let's presume what we're talking about is pitching in the sense of creating a bespoke piece of music with the aim of getting you a job or commission. My very good friend and composer supremo, Dru Masters, has a couple of pointers that I wholeheartedly agree with.
I'll pitch up, but I won't pitch down, by which I mean there's nothing more likely to piss me off than if somebody comes to me with a non-scripted format, like millions of other non-scripted formats that I've done in the past, and asks me to pitch for it. Why would I do that? Conversely, for drama, I find I pitch almost all the time, and actually I find it quite useful. I'll give you an example of that. There's a director that I've worked with a lot called Eros Lin, and I've pitched for almost everything that we've done together. I've pitched for all the dramas that we've done. And what he does is, it's a slightly different situation because I'm not pitching against a lot of other people usually, but he will come to me and give me a scene quite early on before he's finished filming, and it will be a fine cut. And what he'll do is he'll talk me through what he wants, and I'll write the main theme. I'll do a pitch. It'll probably be 10-15 minutes long, quite a lot of music, and it'll usually be a big scene where there isn't much dialogue, and it's really a scene that's going to need music to carry it. Usually, again, from the first episode of something if it's multi-episodic. And what this means is I will do the work. I'll write the theme. I'll start working on the sound palette, and then I'll give it to him. He'll give me some notes. I'll rework it a bit. He'll give me his final notes, and I'll do a final version. And then he'll present it to the producer and, crucially, the executive producers. At that point, he can usually get them on board to his vision of how he wants it to sound and what I'm going to do. And from then on, it's really easy because the job's done. I know what the themes are, or I certainly have a starting point. I've already scored probably one of the most difficult scenes in the first episode, and everyone's on board. So it actually makes life a lot easier. It's a process that I really welcome. I also feel it cuts out that potential to get hired for a job and then everyone finding that you're not really the right composer for it. It gets that bit out of the way. You're already the right composer because you've won the pitch. So I'm fairly positive about it. Interestingly, I've never had to pitch for a movie. I guess that's partly the movies that I've done. They've been quite low-budget indie movies, and perhaps they didn't have a huge amount of choice. But I've always been able to just get those through talking to the directors. And also, interestingly, I've never had to really change any themes. I've always come up with my first thematic idea, presented it, and had it accepted. Again, I don't know what that says about me or the directors or the particular movies, but that's my experience. So, should you pitch? No, definitely not, but probably.
Brilliant advice there from Dru, which taps into my theory that if you don't value yourself, people aren't going to value you on your behalf. In fact, when I was asked to do Poirot, I was asked to pitch for that. I refused because I felt that I had enough kind of evidence of being able to do that kind of work out there already. I got the job the next day. However, is the purpose of the pitch selling you as the correct candidate for a job, or is the purpose of the pitch to sell a concept, a theme, a musical idea? When these become blurred, this is where I've struggled, and this is where I've been unsuccessful, I'd say about 100%. And there's no worse area of the business for this kind of mental blurring where pitching rules than advertising. I'm thankfully no expert, but Paul Thompson, my amazing business partner and very good friend, is.
When I started out in '95, you used to get paid, there used to be maybe two composers who'd be pitching on a job. You'd get paid about £750. You'd put a couple of tracks together, the agency would pick one of the four, or sometimes, if in exceptional circumstances, they might have three composers, so they'd have 6 tracks to pick from. they'd pick the track they liked best, and then they'd work with the composer to get the master. Now, you know, I remember a thing, you know, maybe in 2003, 2004, I was getting paid to pitch for a worldwide car commercial, so it was a really big job, very, very high fee, and I was getting £750. As far as I knew, there was one other composer who was pitching, and while I was working on my pitch, I got calls from maybe 4 or 5 little composer agencies in London asking if I wanted to do a free pitch for the same commercial. So around that sort of time, the landscape changed, and a lot of these kind of agencies, which might be a real office somewhere, or it might be some guy sitting in his kitchen, kind of sprang up, and they would have 50-50 deals with the composers, so they would gather a group of composers together to pitch for something for nothing, and if they won the job, they would split the fee 50-50 with the composers. So great gig for the guy standing in his kitchen, not so great for a composer who might have bills. Yeah, how do you buy your equipment? How do you put shoes on your children's feet? You know, and even if you have no responsibilities like that, how do you keep yourself alive? Well, difficult if you're not getting paid for your work. You know, sometimes you might get something out of it. One of my best performing library tracks started life as a pitch for a fast food commercial, but I did get paid to pitch on that job. So around about that time, I kind of realised the commercials world was sort of getting to the point where it wasn't worth pitching. And the reason for that was that you weren't getting paid, and that maybe, you know, an agency producer might have anything up to 100, 150 tracks coming in just from composers. They might then also have library companies pitching tracks that they thought were good from their catalogues. They might be considering sync. You know, it might be that one of the creatives wants to use Spandau Ballet, but you didn't know. So it's a huge wild goose chase now in the commercials world. That's certainly the way it is in the UK. So I would say no when it comes to commercials. TV has always been a little bit more discerning in the sense that they would have a group of composers pitching. It might only be 2 or 3. You would tend to get paid to pitch. This is for theme tunes. But you would get a good line of communication. You'd know the people you were working with. You might work on something. You know, if they like the idea, they'll work with you to get to the end. It's a bit more like old school composing. So I would, you know, if it was a good show, I would still probably pitch for a TV theme tune. I think that's worth doing. Drama, it's a difficult one. I wouldn't pitch now for drama. I think I've done enough work to be able to show what I can do, and you know, I would say that if a producer likes what you do, then they can hire you to do something new and creative. But you know, they know that they like your work, so that's worth their while, kind of betting on you. So I wouldn't tend to. It's also really hard because when you're doing a drama, it kind of develops as you're working on it, and the first idea is not necessarily the best idea. It's not necessarily the idea for the show that you come up with. So I probably wouldn't pitch for TV drama. I would say film. If you have an existing relationship with someone in the production, it's worth pitching for a decent budget film. But again, 1 or 2, maybe a thematic idea, maybe a little mini suite, which shows the kind of concept that you have for the project. But again, it's a dialogue. It's a 2-way conversation. So you can't just be flinging stuff into the void. That's totally pointless. In my opinion, I've never had success from, you know, and I've tried, you know, earlier on in my career, I tried the listings agencies where you see everything that's in production and there's a points person to contact in the production office. And never really worth doing. Sometimes you make a contact out of doing that, but they'll generally have some people in mind that they're thinking of. For micro-budget films, you either just do it or you don't do it. That's the thing for me. You either say, okay, I'll do it, and then it's not a pitching scenario, and you keep your rights. Unless the film picks up huge distribution, so it goes from micro-budget into something that's actually going to get out there. And then games, again, I think it's more about relationships. I think a lot of the time, you know, it's rather than spending loads of time pitching and flinging stuff into the void, it's better to spend your time developing relationships with creative people. If you want to be a creative professional, then there are loads of creative people out there working on all kinds of stuff. I've done below the line stuff, which is what you refer to as stuff that doesn't air. So that might be, I've done quite a few car launches. It might be at a huge motor show, so it's something that's kind of surround, or big installations, things like that. I've done stuff I did stuff for the Winter Olympics one year. So there's lots of opportunities away from the kind of traditional, TV and film game, AAA games, all that kind of stuff. It's worth doing an IELTS game that's really creative, that you love, that you can do something good on, and you think it'll add something to your portfolio. And that's another thing. Portfolios, when you're sending stuff in, if you're not going to pitch, but you're sending in a reel, show what you can do. Make the most of what you have. If you've only done one IELTS game, then just present that really well and show and explain why your creative solution was really good for the project. I see people often ripping commercials off YouTube and writing alternative versions, and if you receive that as a producer and you look at it and you go, well, that's not the music from that commercial, or you think, I know who was the composer of that and it wasn't you, then for me that always kind of sullies everything else on there. So I would say that's not a good idea, personally, in the pitch process. I'd say just present the stuff that you've done and be proud of what you've done. It doesn't have to be a massive budget blockbuster. It just has to be good creative work that serves the brief and adds something really great to the project. Show what you can do. The way to stand out from everybody else is to have your own voice and your own creative idea of what it might be. It could be anything. It could be really unusual melodies or harmonies, or the way that you produce stuff. But try to do something different. Just don't try and sound like everybody else. Be your own person. Develop your own voice, and that is much more attractive. Producers, now for these for big shows, are looking at people who haven't done much. That often they're looking for a unique voice. So if you can demonstrate that you've got that, then that's a huge benefit to you. So I think that kind of covers most of what I think about pitching. Just pitching blind is I just don't think it's worth it. There are too many people doing that, and you need to find a way to differentiate yourself. So I'd say it's more about developing relationships and more about making yourself a unique voice in some way. However you find, whatever way you find to do that, that's where your own creativity comes in.
So for me, there's just a few, I think, key pointers for pitching and how you go about it. The first thing you need to do is establish what the pitch is for. What is the objective? It's so easy to get this wrong. What do they want to achieve from you pitching? I mean, only the other day I went to a meeting thinking I'd got a gig and it was just a kind of creative kickoff, and they just went, so pitch us your idea. I was like, I don't know. The next thing is to kind of establish whether you're pitching up or down, and that's kind of the key point to, are you going to pitch? And once you've decided to pitch, you need to make sure you can pitch the fucking bejesus out of it. I'm going to tell you some really horrific stories about pitching and where it's got to these days. But I'm going to have a drink with these guys. Fancy seeing you here.
Hello, Christian.
I think you'd be surprised at the length that people go to these days. A friend of mine talked about this gig that he went up for. It was a computer game and didn't get it. And then he bumped into the guy who did get it, and they were kind of acquaintances. And he says, you bastard, you got that thing. And he went, oh, no, come with me. I want to show you what I did. This composer had basically booked a massive string band in a studio with a camera crew, and that was his pitch. It was a proper professionally made camera with dolly and a crane, an amazing, massive, fully orchestrated big string section. And it cost him about 15 grand. When I heard this story, I was like, oh my God, this is a nightmare that composers are spending this amount of money on pitches. But then if you think about it, this computer game was probably worth 250 grand. This is business. This is a good bit of kind of sensible exposure. He knows that really no one probably has the capital to do that, the time or the guts. So he's just gone for it, knowing I pretty much think that this is going to guarantee me the job. And that investment worked for him. And on the whole, when I've pitched, I'm a very poor competitor. So my success rate with pitches has been very, very low, except for this one time where it was myself, my brother Joe and his business partner Alexis, and we were pitching for Alien Isolation. It was clear what the objective was. You know, we were not proving ourselves as individual composers. We weren't proving what we felt the score should be. We were just proving ourselves as a creative force. And we really pushed the boat out. We spent 2 weeks solid making a demo. We involved Steve Reich's singers, some strings, and we got it professionally mixed. I guess all in all, maybe cost about $7,500, and we got that gig. And again, the $7,500 were well spent, because this was 2 years of our life, an amazing title that has led on to kind of great stuff, you know, BAFTA nomination and all of that kind of stuff. So whilst my initial response to should you pitch is fuck no, well, I've done many unsuccessful pitches, but that one was a particularly good one. So in conclusion, I think Dru's summation of pitch up but don't pitch down is great. And I think if you decide to pitch, make sure that you can afford it the time that maybe your competitors are affording it. You know, these are serious business decisions. Thanks as always for watching. If you like what actually, do you know what? I'm so knackered. I've been traveling for about 24 hours. Hit buttons. No night.